Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of WN Movie Talk Podcast. I am Trev. I am your host for today. I'm always your host. I am the one consistency of this inconsistent podcast. Today's episode I am calling a 3D sci-fi movie marathon. I've got 4 3D films that I have watched and I am going to discuss 4 3D science fiction movies from my collection. One of my favourite types of film to watch in 3D is 3D science fiction films. So that's what I've done this week. 4 science fiction films. I'll tell you what they are. Film number 1, The Martian, starring Matt Damon, directed by Ridley Scott. It tells the story of Mark Watney, astronaut on a mission to Mars who is left for dead and stranded at 140 million miles from home. The next film on the list is a similar sort of theme to The Martian. It's Gravity, starring Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, and directed by Alfonso Cuarón. So Gravity, another sort of someone gets isolated in space story. George Clooney and Sandra Bullock trying to survive. You know the story. The next film on the list is, we're going down a different path now. Judgment is Coming. Dredd. Dredd, directed by Peter Travis. Carl Urban dons the iconic helmet of Judge Dredd in this ultra-violent, adrenaline-fueled action flick set in the dystopian megacity 1. Now, I've never really watched Dredd, or Judge Dredd, the old one with Stallone. I've never read the comics, not something I've been into. But one of my listeners got in touch with me when he saw that I was sort of revisiting 3D films. Said, look, I've got Dredd I'm going to get rid of. Why don't you have it? So that was listener Nathan Kent. So thanks ever so much, Nathan. And then the final film that we are going to look at is Edge of Tomorrow. Live, Die, Repeat. Starring Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. Now, you know me, I'm not a massive Tom Cruise fan. I don't really go to see Tom Cruise films. But I've always enjoyed sort of this time loop, Groundhog Day style scenario. I love the source code and Groundhog Day, Palm Springs. But I'd never seen this one. So before we get on to that, anyway, something I haven't done in a podcast for a long time is reach out to you, the listeners. So over on Facebook and in a Facebook group, specifically for 3D movies, and on my YouTube channel, I've reached out and I've asked you, what do you consider the best 3D science fiction films? We've had an assortment of answers. West McG says Star Trek Into Darkness, Avatar 1 and 2, and the latest Star Wars trilogy. Jeffrey Nelson says, you've got to go back to where it all began with 3D sci-fi movies, the 50s. Let me point you to It Came From Outer Space and Robot Monster, both from 1953, Gog and The Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954, and Revenge of the Creature from 1955. I've not gone down the route of like collecting older 3D films at the moment, although I did back along watch House of Wax, which everyone says, oh, that's like, you know, one of the definitive 3D horror films. I wasn't that taken by it, to be honest. I didn't think it was all that good. The 3D was okay, but yeah, it's not my sort of thing. So I haven't really gone down the older films yet, but maybe I'll have to have a check them out. Martin Davis says The Martian is pretty spectacular. Phil Williams says Pacific Rim always springs to mind. Very aggressive 3D conversion, particularly that first monster attack is just bonkers good. I've got Pacific Rim. That almost was one in here, but because I'd been sent Dredd, and I thought, well, it'd be nice to feature Dredd, so you know it was sent by a listener. So I went for Dredd instead. Jason Illett says Gravity. I swear at the end of that movie you feel the gravity kicks back in when she stands up out of the sea. Feels like you're being pushed into your seat. And Andrew Murchie says, yeah, I second Gravity. I came out of the cinema feeling like I'd been in space, and it was 100% due to the 3D and Atmos audio. In 2D, it did not have anywhere near the same effect. Now, I didn't see Gravity in the cinema, and watching it this time around, I wish I had, because the camera work is so sort of fluid, so you constantly feel like you're floating, I'm sure. But when you're watching it on like a 45-inch TV, it's not quite the same as when you're watching something in the cinema. As I've said, my favourite experience in 3D was The Christmas Carol. It was like being on a fairground ride. But Christmas Carol I saw at the cinema on that big screen, and it makes you feel like you're being moved around. So you don't get that effect on the TVs. I can watch films through my VR. Sometimes I go and sit at a big screen and watch a 3D film there. That's almost as close to the cinema experience, but it's not quite the same, is it, having a big old heavy headset on your face. Scott Resler says Edge of Tomorrow, Ant-Man, Avatar, Big Hero 6, Dune, Guardians of the Galaxy, Jurassic Park, The Martian, Ready Player One, Rogue One, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, Valerium and Venom. So me and my son watched Guardians of the Galaxy the other night. Avatar, as I've mentioned, is great. I get a couple of other mentions of Avatar. Nathan Kent and Jeff Johnson have both messaged to say Avatar as well. But yeah, I don't know if you could still watch 3D films at the cinemas. I know our local one doesn't, but I haven't been back to a multiplex. But when I got my Blu-ray player at Christmas, the first Blu-ray I bought was Avatar Way of Water in 3D. And it is, if you thought the first one was good, the second one is absolutely fucking spectacular. I was absolutely blown away by it. I said it before. It just they look solid figures swimming around in the sea as well. So I don't know, it was incredible. So I think I'm going to make an extra effort to try and find a 3D cinema to watch the third Avatar in. And I wasn't even looking forward to Avatar 2. I was bored of Avatar by the time because, as someone mentioned earlier, when you watch it on the telly, watching it at the cinema, I watched it 4 times at the cinema. Titanic as well, I watched 4 times at the cinema. But I can't really ever sit through them at home. They're not quite the same effect on the little screens. So yeah, I'm going to really have to make an effort to try and find it in a 3D cinema when the third one comes out. Looking forward to it now. Got me back on board, James Cameron. Well done. So that's it for the listeners' questions. Thanks everyone who's commented. Now let's discuss a movie. Let's start with film number 1, The Martian. So first up in my 3D sci-fi marathon is The Martian from 2015, directed by the legendary Ridley Scott. This survival drama is based on Andy Weir's 2011 novel of the same name, which became a bestseller thanks to its meticulous scientific detail and gripping story. The film marks Scott's 22nd directorial effort. It's actually now up to 28. Amazing, isn't it? The plot follows astronaut Mark Watney, played by Matt Damon, who is left stranded on Mars after his crew is forced to abort their mission due to a violent storm. Presumed dead, Watney must use his ingenuity, scientific knowledge and sheer determination to stay alive, growing food in a makeshift greenhouse whilst trying to contact NASA. Meanwhile, back on Earth, NASA, led by characters played by Jeff Daniels and Chiwetel Ejiofor, scramble to figure out a way to bring Watney back home. The film is praised for its faithfulness to the novel, its sharp screenplay by Drew Goddard and its balance of humour and tension. It's also benefited from input from NASA to ensure scientific accuracy, making it one of the more realistic space survival films to date. Shot largely on sound stages in Budapest, with Wadi Rum Jordan standing in for Mars, the movie's stunning visuals, especially in 3D, make for an immersive experience. So it's basically Castaway in space, isn't it? It's a great film. It won awards, 2 Golden Globes, Best Motion Picture and Best Actor in the comedy musical categories. So I don't understand why it's considered a comedy. It's a bit more of a thriller, I think, than a comedy, but there you go. Bizarre. Yeah, there's funny moments in it, but I wouldn't say it's a laugh-out-loud comedy, would you? Anyway, what I love about this movie is its lack of sort of a emotional, psychological examination of the character and of the dilemma that he faces. It's something that I felt let Gravity down was the emotion behind it, which doesn't ring true to me. Astronauts are selected for their sort of problem solving, their determination. In the special features, Ridley Scott says, they've got the right stuff. That's the film, the right stuff, isn't it? There's no room for fear. You've just got to be logical, practical, and that's exactly what happens here. So it starts up on Mars and you meet the crew of the Ares 3. And then a storm comes in and they have to abandon, and it comes in pretty quick. in 3D, that did look awesome. That storm, the dust clouds, it looked huge, immense. I can only imagine at a cinema it would have been even better. You know, Watney is hit by a bit of shrapnel, a bit of it's like solar panelling, I think, knocks him off his feet. And even though Jessica Chastain goes back to look at him, they're on a countdown, they've got to get out, they've got to take off. So she goes back to look for him, she can't find him, they just got to leave him for dead. And they think he is dead. And even back on Earth, once you meet Jeff Daniels, plays Teddy Sanders, the head of NASA, and Chiwetel Ejiofor as Vincent Kapoor. I'm probably just going to call him Vincent Kapoor for the rest of this podcast. But they announced to the world that, you know, Mark Watney has been killed. It's not till a little bit later on that, you know, Mission Control and that are studying all like the satellite images of Mars, and they see evidence that someone is still there on Mars. But he is. Mark Watney's there. He's got no way of communicating with them, but he knows that they're coming back for a different mission, or, you know, and he's like, right, I've got to survive that long. So he strategically goes through, works out his food, builds a greenhouse inside, plants potatoes in his own shit. It's really great. I think Matt Damon's one of them lovable actors, isn't he? You know, he is the everyman. There's something about him with an everyman quality. And then this is great as well, and you see him sort of talking things through to the cameras. He's got GoPros everywhere. Basically, I think it's like they had to find a way to give him a reason to talk to himself, because in the book, I guess it's all... I've not read the book, but I can imagine there's a lot of him sort of internalising what he's going to do and why he's doing it and how he's going to survive, etc. Whereas in the film, you can't just have all voiceovers and that. Well, you can, but they found this way where they just sit him down and he talks into a GoPro. Now, I'm just going to go off topic for a little while here. My old friend Nath, who you may, if you know this podcast, he was my first partner in crime when we first started the podcast. It was me and Nath. If you know Summit or Nothing, that's our hiking channel that we used to do together, hiking and wild camping. Now, The Martian was one of Nath's favourite films. He loves it. And as I'm watching the film back now, because I haven't watched it since it came out in 2015, I'm starting to watch the Matt Damon sequences where he's chatting away to the camera. And he does something that Nath used to do in Summit or Nothing quite a lot. And it's something that niggles me. And watching this film is the one part of this film that I cannot stand. And whether it's because of Nath used to do this, and when I was editing the videos, it's driving me nuts. But as he's monologuing to the camera, he's always eating at the same time. And he's not a quiet eater. And I think he thinks it looks cool. And I think maybe Nath thought, oh, Matt Damon looked cool doing that. So every time he'd do a monologue in his tent, he'd always have to make sure he's eating. Yeah. So, and it's not quiet eating. And the same with Matt Damon. It's this, I'm going to eat, I'm going to chomp, I'm going to talk. Oh, my God, it makes me feel sick. I hate noisy eaters. And this film is just littered with it. And I'm thinking, you're on a fucking ration. You don't need to eat constantly. Surely this is too much eating for one man. So that's my biggest niggle with the film. Anyway, we'll get back on the topic now. So I love the design of this film, the design of the suits. Now, the costume designer worked closely with NASA. They wanted to make sure that, you know, things made sense. But obviously, the actual astronaut suits that they wear are a lot more bulky, and there's a lot more going on, like in the helmets and stuff. Whereas Ridley Scott, he's a visionary, you know, he's making a film, he wants it to look good. So the costume designers designed the helmets sort of a bit emptier, and the suits are a bit sleeker, especially on Mars when they're like on land, they're in like almost jumpsuits and, you know, like tight sort of suits. But with that orange design, it looks really cool. Now, she went to NASA to get them to check over and said, you know, would this be... And they were like, yeah, we really like these suits. And they said, don't worry about not being authentic, because, to be honest, we usually copy things off of films ourselves. So, which I thought was a great little line. But like with any film like this, you know, like Apollo 13 and what have you, it's mission control is where people are busy in the background helping to try and bring this guy back. And it's a massive ensemble cast. I mean, just the crew of the spaceship. You've got Jessica Chastain, Sebastian Stan, Kate Mara, Michael Pena, Askell Henny, you know, good cast there, just alone. And that's just in the spaceship. And then down at Mission Control, you've got actors such as Sean Bean, Kristen Wiig, Donald Glover, Benedict Wong. You've got some really great actors portraying these parts, helping to sort of bring our guy home. And it's a real sort of team effort. But, you know, down on the Earth, there is a little bit of politics going on. There's a little bit of headbutting, you know. But mostly they're working together. They all got the same mission to bring them back. But Sean Bean, his character, Mitch Henderson, he's like he's sort of in charge of the crew, is what I get the picture of. And Jeff Daniels decides not to tell the crew that Mark Watney's still alive and that they've left him home. And Sean Bean's sort of like, no, you need to do this. And he's the one who's sort of brushing against all the bureaucracy and the politics. But you get that feel and that sense of this is a team effort, and you've got some of the greatest minds in the world working on bringing this guy back, and the ingenuity of it all. I like the scenes where Matt Damon realises that he can communicate through the cameras, so he uses a hexadecimal system, you know, with 16 characters, so they can communicate, and they move the camera to look at each letter and it spells things out. And, you know, time consuming, but this guy got time. He's stranded up there, 140 million miles away. And as it looks like he's getting it all, you know, on track and he's going to be all right, and then you hear Jeff Daniels down below saying, yeah, you know, so far so good, just as long as nothing goes wrong. And then it all shit hits the fan and everything goes wrong for Matt Damon, and it just ups the stakes again. Having watched the film again, I definitely think I would love to get back and have a look at the book, try reading the book and see how that fares. We've got 3 other films to get on with, so let's just focus now, shall we, on the 3D? The 3D in The Martian, it's well executed. It adds to depth and immersion in certain scenes rather than relying on like sort of gimmicky effects or pop-outs. Ridley Scott's used 3D in other films like Prometheus, but I think here, you know, it's used effectively to enhance this vastness of Mars and the isolation of Mark Watney. But the space moments, you know, the spacecraft and the satellites and rockets and things, that is when the 3D looks so good. I love a 3D film. Watching Guardians of the Galaxy the other week with my son, the space scenes are good in that. Rogue One, as someone mentioned, the battle at the end in space, just amazing in 3D. So that's my favourite bits. But the Mars landscape in this, and the depth of field, these sweeping shots of this Mars terrain, especially when, like, you know, in the scenes during Watney's rover travels, they are stunning in 3D. There's a sense of scale with these vast deserts, these rocky cliffs, deep craters. It truly benefits from this extra level of depth. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but the storm sequence, that initial dust storm that strands Watney, is particularly immersive in the 3D. Debris flying, chaotic winds. It creates this visceral, in-the-moment experience. It makes you feel the intensity of the situation, even more so than if you was watching it in 2D. I could only imagine at the cinema it would have been better again. There's a space rescue scene as well in the climax where the Hermes crew attempts to rescue Watney. The 3D really shines. This sense of weightlessness, floating objects, the vastness of space surrounding the characters, it makes this sequence especially gripping. So it's great but subtle for the majority of the movie. It enhances the immersion rather than sort of making a spectacle of it. It expands on the world, it adds realism without being distracting. If you enjoy 3D films for their depth, their atmosphere, rather than the flashy effects, then The Martian is definitely a great example of how it can be used effectively. So that was The Martian. That was film number 1. Shall we now discuss film number 2? What did I say that was? Oh yeah, Gravity. Let's go. Next in my 3D marathon is Gravity for 2013, a visually stunning and nerve-shredding thriller directed by Alfonso Cuarón. This is a film that pushes the boundaries of cinematic storytelling, immersing audiences in the vast terrifying emptiness of space like never before. At its core, Gravity is a simple yet intense survival story. Sandra Bullock stars as Dr. Ryan Stone, a medical engineer on her first space mission, whilst George Clooney plays veteran astronaut Matt Kowalski. When debris from a destroyed satellite smashes into their space shuttle, they are left stranded in orbit, spinning helplessly with no communication to Earth. With oxygen running low and no clear way home, Stone must fight against impossible odds to survive. The film was directed and co-written by Alfonso Cuarón, a filmmaker known for his signature long takes, immersive cinematography and deeply human storytelling. His previous works include Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Children of Men, whilst Children of Men showcased his knack for gritty dystopian realism with incredible one-take action sequences. Gravity took his visual storytelling to new heights, quite literally, by making space itself the antagonist. The screenplay was co-written by Cuarón and his son and was in development for several years before the technology was advanced enough to bring their vision to life. Originally intended to star Angelina Jolie and Robert Downey Jr., until after casting changes Bullock and Clooney took on the roles. To achieve the illusion of weightlessness, the film relied on groundbreaking visual effects, including custom-built LED light boxes that helped simulate space lighting and extensive CGI that blended seamlessly with live-action performances. Unlike many other space films, Gravity is almost entirely a one-character story with minimal dialogue and a relentless, immersive pace. It stands apart from Cuarón's earlier films in its sheer technical innovation, but still retains his signature emotional depth, focusing on themes of isolation, resilience and rebirth. Upon its release, Gravity became a cinematic event, praised for its realism, breathtaking 3D effects and immersive sound design. It went on to win several Academy Awards, including Best Director, cementing his place as one of the most visionary filmmakers of his generation. So, Gravity, although The Martian has this great cast of Hollywood actors, there's something about Sandra Bullock and George Clooney in this that they are just too shiny. Clooney especially. He's like Buzz Lightyear flying around in his spacesuit, you know? But I don't know what it is about him. I can't take him seriously in this role. He looks like he's pretending to be an astronaut. Now, Gravity, it's a mesmerising film. It's gripping. I mean, once you start watching it, there's no point where you can relax. You know, it just is this, it's one thing after another, you know. The director, you know, he takes full advantage of everything at his disposal. The frame just looks amazing, incredible all the time. There's something about George Clooney floating around in that spacesuit that I just don't see it as realistic. And like, there's a line in it where he says, "You've never noticed how wonderfully handsome I am," or something, you know, something to that effect. And I'm not saying that astronauts are ugly at all, but he just doesn't look natural or real in that spacesuit. And on top of that, one of my biggest gripes with the movie is Sandra Bullock's character. She has so much emotional baggage that, you know, what Ridley Scott said about astronauts having the right stuff, not letting fear in. She's got all sorts of emotional baggage going on. And I don't think she would be safe in space, you know? I remember watching a documentary about astronauts and about NASA. And when they're training astronauts, they watch them eat their dinners. And when they sit down to a dinner, if they see an astronaut pick up a salt shaker and just put it on his food before he's tried his food, that astronaut's failed. That's how specific they're testing these people. They don't want someone who's just going to assume that they need salt. They want someone who's going to test first before they make that decision. And yeah, Gravity, you know, Sandra Bullock's character's lost her daughter. She's grieving. She's full of fear in this movie and self-doubt, and it just doesn't gel to me. That being said, I still enjoyed the film. It is visually stunning. That opening sequence with the camera just floating through space. I can imagine that this would have been the spectacle. I don't know why I didn't go and watch it when it was on the cinema, but I can imagine this would have felt like you was in space, floating around. And the camera, you know, it's revolving at 360 all the time, and one minute you're looking down at the Earth, and the next minute you're looking up into the vastness of space. It's a bit more actiony than The Martian, which isn't a bad thing. You know, I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I don't know how realistic it is. I mean, well, Gravity does capture the dangers and the beauty as well of space exploration. NASA scientists have noted several inaccuracies. First off, the depiction of a satellite demolition chain reaction. Secondly, the ease of travelling between spacecraft. I mean, that's a part of the film I quite liked, was that, like, they need to get from this satellite to that space station, and, you know, and she's got to hop around and get from one to the other to try and thumb a lift home on someone else's, to joyride someone else's equipment home. I love that sort of idea. There's some, the hardware and the design look accurate. It's a great simulation of zero gravity, as I mentioned, and it really gives you that sense of, like, how dangerous it is in space. But, NASA said it gets things wrong, that space debris, the film exaggerates the danger of space debris as it can move so fast that astronauts wouldn't even see it, and holes would just mysteriously appear in the equipment around them. I love the thought of all that debris going around and then it's on its way back again. I love to see, the special effects and the silence of space as well. You see Sandra Bullock working away and then you just see bits flying past her in the background and smashing stuff off. The destruction and that. The effects are great. But, yeah, it just doesn't gel with me, this movie. I much preferred The Martian to this. As I said, there's a lot more emotion in this, and I'm getting to a point in my life where I want to go to a cinema and just enjoy. We don't need emotion in everything, and that's where The Martian. They're on a mission. They haven't got time for emotion. They haven't got time to explore the psychological impact of these things. They're just scientists who are just keeping going. Whereas in this, there's dream sequences, and it's not as bad as Armageddon, but it feels a bit Hollywood in so many places. I'm not knocking the film. I really, really enjoy the film. There's just coming off of the back of The Martian, where he's sciencing the shit out of it, and it's all very much problem solving, and then going straight into Gravity, it all just seems a bit more fantastic and far-fetched. And I don't know, even though there's Hollywood actors, I keep saying the same thing in The Martian, they're almost actors that become the characters, whereas George Clooney is just George Clooney in every movie we see, And I mean, Sandra Bullock, she's a great actress, and she has a lot of emotion in this film, which I said is a great performance. And I'm sure astronauts can get emotional and fearful, but she just seems like she's that from the start. It seems like she had a lot of baggage to bring with her, which could jeopardise any mission up in space, But she is great in this. But I do remember that reading an article about films set in space, and they was on about Armageddon and how NASA show Armageddon to their students, and the mission, the challenge for them is to point out all the inaccuracies, and there's hundreds. But yeah, then one astronaut had mentioned about Sandra Bullock in Gravity, once she gets out of her spacesuit, and that she looks great in her little short shorts and her little crop top vest. It looks fantastic. And he said, when we come out of a spacesuit, when we've been out on a spacewalk, he says we're incredibly sweaty, all wrinkly and sweaty, like, when you take your foot out of like a rubber sock that you used to wear at the swimming pools, Veruca sock. He says we really smell, we're really like pruny. And we also wear these massive giant nappies, So, but I mean, no one wants to see Sandra Bullock all pruny and in a giant nappy, do they? Or do they? I don't know. Maybe you do. But, yeah, I just love this film where the opening scene and you just see him floating around and that long shot, and you don't notice the splice. And even when afterwards, there's loads of splices afterwards and loads of visible cuts. But it takes you a while. You think, has it stopped? Has that one shot stopped yet? When did that stop? When did is it still going on? Because there's so much fluid camera work. It's a bit like the way they filmed Birdman years later. There's another scene like it in the Revenant as well. So which, isn't the same director, but it's similar sort of style. So, yeah, it just is this. It is an immersive experience, and you're in there with those characters, and you can't escape. You've got to follow her from post to post trying to survive. You've got that one tether cord that comes undone, and when she spins out of space, there's a lot of spinning out of control in this film, and I just think, oh my God, it makes you giddy watching it, and you think there's no coming out of this. When you see her spinning out of control, and later on George Clooney as well goes floating off, that must be such a daunting prospect, to just sort of float off into space. I remember reading the 2001 books as well, and Frank Paul sort of goes off into space, and don't they find his body in one of the later books and they bring him back to life? But I suppose they're not. I always think, oh my God, you'll just go off there, how long would you survive? But I suppose you only last as long as the oxygen in your suit. But yeah, that thought, that's a frightening thought of just drifting off into space. And there's some shocking bits in this, you do see the horrors of space there, mate, when the debris gone through his helmet. And also when they find that craft and it's like been smashed open. I think it's their craft at the beginning, isn't it? Once it's, it's been destroyed by the debris, and they go in and everyone's floating around. And you've only got to open that door for a second. The split second it's open, you're just all exposed to these temperatures that we cannot fathom. That's how cold it is up there. And there's no oxygen, there's no atmosphere, there's nothing. You'll just be frozen to death. Space is a marvel. But at the same time, it's absolutely frightening. It's almost like, I always look at it like a body of water, but it's not water, but it must be something. It's sculpting these planets into pebbles, so there must be movement through there to make everything go perfectly spherical. I don't know. I can't get my head around it, but I love it. But as I said, it is a deeper film. There's more emotional weight, more sort of looking at the layers of the characters and their backstories, they got backstories. Whereas The Martian, you don't find out a lot about people in the background, but you didn't need it. And I think the bits, for me, that slowed Gravity down was where those emotional scenes. But it is such a ride. It is just such a mad ride of a film, And the lighting in the movie, they built special lights to get that sort of filming in space light. And the lighting, it is striking. There is something incredible about that. It does look like, I don't know, I've not been in space, but when you see photos of the astronauts and that, and it's like this ethereal sort of eerie daylight in space. And when you see the Earth all lit up behind them, it's lit the same way as them. I don't know how to explain it. It looks incredible. But then to see them lit up like that as well against the black, it's just striking and stark. Yeah, really. I really do. I know it sounds like I've knocked this film quite a bit, but I do really enjoy it. We've gone from an ensemble space film to sort of a film where we're just really very personal, very private. We're stuck with two characters for a lot of the film and one for the remainder. But that being said, the 3D in Gravity is regarded as one of the best uses of the format in modern cinema. The film's designed with 3D in mind. It uses it to create this breathtaking sense of immersion and depth. Unlike many sort of post-converted films, Gravity was meticulously crafted to enhance the experience, making it one of the best arguments for 3D filmmaking. As I mentioned, that opening long take, the film's stunning opening. It is stunning. It's this unbroken shot that lasts several minutes, and it establishes the vast emptiness of space, establishes weightlessness, and the 3D emphasises that depth, with the Earth looming in the background and the characters floating towards or away from the camera. The debris storm scenes, where the space debris shreds through the space station and the other structures. It's some of the most intense moments in the movie, but also in 3D cinema. The fragments are flying past the viewer, and it creates this visceral edge of your seat experience. And several moments in Gravity use like first-person view from Dr. Ironstone's helmet, especially like as she's tumbling through space. And that 3D heightens the disorientation and the claustrophobia, making the audience feel as if they're living inside the spacesuit themselves. But that bit, I don't know, if she was knocked out into space like that, spinning off. Do they really have that technology that he could just go off and fly off and bring her? And like her flying around like Wally at the end with a fire extinguisher and that. It all seems a bit too fantastic for me. I can't, like I say, it's just certain bits in this movie I just cannot take to. But, you know, the 3D is considered to be groundbreaking. It does enhance the immersion. It does give you the true feeling of space, the sense of weightlessness. It's amplified. And you can see why critics and audiences alike praised Gravity as one of the few films where 3D felt essential rather than optional. So, yeah, if you have the chance to watch it in 3D, it is highly recommended. And if I ever see that it's playing anywhere in 3D at a cinema, I'll be there. Because it is one of the best examples of how the 3D format can elevate a story rather than just lending to it. So that was film number 2 of my 3D sci-fi movie marathon. Let's settle down now and have a look at film number 3, which is Dredd. So the next stop in my 3D sci-fi marathon is Dredd 2012. A brutal, neon-soaked action thriller that brings the legendary comic book character Judge Dredd to life like never before. Directed by Pete Travis and written by Alex Garland, the film strips away the excess of big-budget superhero movies and delivers a raw, visceral and hyper-stylised vision of dystopian justice. Set in the crime-ridden, post-apocalyptic megacity 1, Dredd follows the toughest law enforcer of them all, Judge Dredd, played here by Carl Urban from the likes of Star Trek movies, the new Star Trek movies, plays Bones, and also he's also in The Boys. In this future, judges act as judge, jury and executioner, keeping order in a chaotic world. The plot sees Dredd and his rookie partner, Judge Anderson, played by Olivia Thirlby, responding to a brutal triple homicide in the towering slums of Peach Trees. But once inside, they become trapped by the ruthless drug lord Mama, Lena Headey, Cersei Lannister, Game of Thrones, who locks down the entire 200-storey tower and orders her gang to eliminate them. What follows is a relentless, high-octane fight for survival as Dredd carves his way through the building, dispensing justice one bullet at a time. While Dredd was directed by Pete Travis, much of the film's creative vision is credited to screenwriter Alex Garland, best known for 28 Days Later and Sunshine. Garland later went on to direct Ex Machina and Annihilation, but Dredd already showcases his knack for crafting immersive, tightly controlled sci-fi worlds. This version of Judge Dredd is far removed from the cheesy 1995 Judge Dredd film starring Stallone. Here, Carl Urban fully embraces the character's no-nonsense, stoic nature, never once removing his helmet. He stays true to the source material from the 2000 AD comics. Visually, Dredd makes excellent use of its R rating, leaning into ultra-violent, slow-motion action sequences enhanced by the fictional drug slow-mo, which makes time appear to move at a fraction of its speed. These scenes, drenched in neon colours and hyper-detailed carnage, were designed specifically with 3D in mind, creating one of the most striking uses of the format in an action film. Yet despite its modest budget and a disappointingly low box office return, Dredd has since gained a strong cult following, with many fans praising its gritty, stripped-down approach and calling for a sequel. So how does it hold up today? And is the 3D any good? So let's have a look and talk about that. So I didn't know Dredd going into this. As I said, Nathan Kent sent me the Blu-ray, so Nathan, thanks for that. I probably would have never picked this one up. I would have thought it wasn't the sort of film I watched, but watching it now, having watched it, to me it had a very similar feel to RoboCop. And I know RoboCop is sort of based a little bit on Judge Dredd. We discussed it actually in our RoboCop episode. So I don't know how well it captures the spirit of Judge Dredd comics. I hear it's pretty good, pretty close to it. But yeah, to me, my God, does it remind me of RoboCop a lot. And as you know, RoboCop is one of my favourite films. RoboCop 2, 3, the sequel, the series, none of it's ever done anything for me. So this was almost like watching a sequel to RoboCop to me. So Alex Garland, if you're listening, why don't you take the mantle of RoboCop and bring us the next RoboCop film? So the plot is like stripped down. It's like there's nothing, no layers to peel back and look under. It is just this comic book adventure where they go to investigate this crime. They're locked down in the building, which Lena Headey's character, Mama, she's in charge. And Domhnall Gleeson, he's in this as well, as this like techie hired by the Klan. He's got these like weird eyes that they've imported. And Lena Headey, I mean, I know as Cersei Lannister, she was evil. As this, she's equally as evil. She got the scarred face. But she locks down, when she knows the judges are there, she locks down the judge and then just puts out an award on the head of Judge Dredd and his partner, Judge Anderson. Now, she's not usually the type of person that they would take on as a judge, but she's got this, like, foresight. She can see the future. So they've put them together and Dredd has got to take her under his wing. And they get locked down in this building. It's very much a sort of it's almost like just a video game, you know? It would make a good video game. They're just going through this tower, taking down the bad guys and getting caught, you know, and it's very tight. There's no distracting subplots. It's very minimalistic, really good script. I mean, I do like Alex Garland's work. So Carl Urban as Judge Dredd, you know, never removes his helmet. He's got this gruff, monotone deliverance. I found him really good. He does look, maybe his head looks a bit too small in the helmet. I don't know if that's how it's supposed to look, but I did think he was absolutely convincing and enjoyable to watch him just stomping around. Yeah, really, really good. I can't really compare him to the Stallone version because, as I mentioned, I haven't seen Stallone in it. I've never watched it. But, you know, Urban, he brings as much... I don't know, even though he's this, like, muted, sort of unstoppable presence, you get that thought that he's always got a plan that he's following, you feel. He's always in control, even when you think he's not, and he's just, nothing throws him. He is completely stoic. He's like this cold, efficient machine almost, you know, that's what I mean. He feels like RoboCop. He's, like, very methodical. He's got this no-nonsense approach to law enforcement and, you know, much like the astronauts in the films before, he hasn't got time for fear or doubt, or he's just got to see the problem and look for the solution. So very similar characters to what we've already seen, you know, in these previous two films, Gravity and The Martian. But you know he's doing it for the right reasons. You get that he's got this great moral compass. He's one of the good judges. We meet some bad judges later on, but yeah. I love his weapon, you know. What is it? They call it the Lawgiver, is it? It has this pistol that has these multiple firing modes, which he can switch between instinctively. You know, whatever his situation is, he's got a different mode for it. Incendiary rounds, you know, armour-piercing bullets, stun shots. What was the one he uses in the opening scene? Hot shot. He shoots it and just burns the bloke from inside out. You know, it keeps the action varied and it sort of showcases this character and the skills and the weaponry. It's really great science fiction character. I think it is a really good performance for someone who, you know, all you see is his chin and his mouth. You do get that full sense of his performance. And Olivia Thirlby as Anderson, you know, she's got these psychic abilities and it adds another layer to the movie without having to, like, take it off in a tangent on a different side, you know, in a different storyline. She has much more of a human character than Dredd. She's much more emotional. She mentions herself that she came from these sort of buildings, these mega structures. She was brought up in one, and you know, people there are worth saving. And but Lena Headey, as Mama, she's just vile. She's a real great villain. You know, Cersei Lannister, because you used to scream at the screen for her, and in this, she's just as spiteful. And I mean, the three men who were murdered at the beginning, she sort of tells them, you know, they're like, what should we do with these to punish them? And she's like, skin them and then throw them over the top. You know, it's just torturous evil. And the thought of like having that drug slow-mo, which is great, I'll get onto that in a minute, but having that drug slow-mo, and then being given that and then skinned alive, so you feel every painstaking, excruciating millisecond of that experience. Just what a horrible thought. So she's not this evil villain that needs to deliver these elaborate monologues, or, her dialogue is measured and deliberate through it, and it makes her feel much more calculated and far more ominous, and without raising her voice, she's just this unquestionable authority figure. She's got this like calm demeanour about her that just completely is at contrast with this brutality of, what she's ordering people to do, and it makes her this real sort of a chilling villain. Really worked. As I said, I didn't know that I was going to enjoy this film as much as I did. I really enjoyed it, and I'll probably watch this one again very soon, I think. So she's not like a physical character, she's a psychological villain. She rules through fear, and absolute control over her gang. But her presence, it looms over the entire film, even when she isn't present. You feel that her influence is there, sort of enforcing, terrorising the residents. I don't know, she's just got this casual sort of cruelty about her, hasn't she? It's really great, really unsettling. She does have a bit of a backstory, she was a prostitute who took over a gang and clawed her way to the top. But it never sort of goes too far into things. It leaves a lot sort of unexplained. We don't need to know everything about her. It is an escapist film again. It's not one you need to stop and think about. There's not really many points where the story slows. You're just in it until it's done. It's just really, great film. So it's got this cyberpunk inspired look. Mega City 1. It does feel a bit like RoboCop's Detroit, in the opening car chase scenes, but a lot more daylight. A lot lighter, not so grimy almost. But it's a great introduction where you're rolling across the desert and then all of a sudden you see this city sort of behind this wall, and the 3D is really great. The extreme, the slow motion of the slow-mo drugs is just great. I love that effect. During the chase you see one of the chaps in the back of the car take the slow-mo and everything slows down, and it really creates these stylish sort of moments of mesmerising, beautiful, high contrast colours bleach in. It's really stylish. I really enjoyed those scenes. And then in the 3D, they look just as great. When you see them squirt, it's sort of a POV shot when you see them squirting the slow-mo into the mouth, and then it all slows down halfway through, like the injection. You see all the liquid inside, and then you see dust particles floating around. It's really great. I'll come up to the 3D in a minute. But the violence, it's that RoboCop comic violence. It is over the top, but it doesn't feel out of place at all. It's excessive without being too excessive. It suits the story. It suits that future. I mean, some of the best scenes, were the minigun massacre. Is one of the standout action sequences for me, where Mama's gang, they open fire with this massive minigun. They just shred entire floors of peach trees, trying to kill Dredd. Just the destruction, walls exploding, civilians are caught in the crossfire. It sort of underscores this really sort of ruthless, violent, ultra-violent tone of the movie. Yet, Dredd is still always calm under pressure. He's calculated, full, he's got this real skill and composure about him. And then the final confrontation, it's fittingly brutal, as well. But yet understated. Dredd doesn't engage in a drawn-out fight with Mama. He just incapacitates her and, delivers this swift justice, forcing her to inhale slow-mo before throwing her from the top of the tower, as she did to those guys before, making sure that she sort of experiences that dread and terror as she falls at a fraction, of the normal speed. I just think that's a great poetic ending, but it's merciless, He's just like, you've done these horrible things, you deserve this. And he's gives his verdict as he throws her over. Negotiations over. Sentence is death. It's just this unwavering commitment to the law, and that he's enforcing. I just love the slow-mo drug. I think that's a great concept for a drug, slowing everything down. It's brilliant. But this is a 3D movie discussion, so we better discuss the 3D in the film. I think it's one of the standout elements, to be honest. It really does well using the 3D format to enhance this gritty, stylised, ultra-violent world. The film was shot in 3D. It wasn't sort of one that was post-converted afterwards. So it's been thought about, each shot and frame has been thought about to how it would be in 3D, very much like Gravity. It's designed for that medium. And the action sequences and the slow motion scenes, they just really elevated because of the 3D. And then this is, bearing in mind, all these 3D reviews I'm doing are just on sort of not even I think they're only like a 40-inch telly I've got, it's not even a huge telly. And they're amazing there. So I can't imagine what they would have been like in the cinema. The best 3D moments, as I said, the slow-mo drug scenes, some absolutely visually stunning 3D moments. Everything slows down, water droplets, shattering glass, blood splatter, sort of droplets and particles in the sky. Everything's in this vivid, high contrast detail. Enhanced by the 3D, it makes each element feel like it's suspended in space, just drifting there. It's great. The city of peach trees, there's massive tower blocks where most of the film, takes place. It's all amplified in the 3D. The shootouts, especially like when looking from high angles and viewing down the centre of the tower. The use of the corridors, a lot of corridor shots in this, and it's all great use of the 3D. It gives you the extra depth. And it really does pull you into the action and to the movies. And then, when Mama's thrown from the top of the building and her extended, her death is this extended sequence in slow motion. And the 3D effect makes the descent feel, even more sort of vertigo-inducing as it was before. It just emphasises the brutality of the moment. So, yeah, I really thought the 3D in Dredd was excellent. One of the many films that really benefits from 3D. And, it didn't perform well at the box office. It's got this cult status now. I think a lot of people have grown to love it. But I'd imagine seeing it in the 3D, it would have been one of those excellent cinematic experiences as well. Just for this cool-looking, stylish 3D film. Nice and short and sweet. Yeah, absolutely awesome. I'd have loved it. So, yeah, really enjoyed that. Thanks ever so much for sending that in, Nathan. Really do appreciate that. So, yeah, got one more film to discuss now. Edge of Tomorrow. We better get on it, haven't we? So, for the fourth and final movie in our 3D sci-fi movie marathon, we turn to Edge of Tomorrow, a film that blends a Groundhog-style type time loop storytelling with high-octane military action. Released in 2014, this Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt-led blockbuster takes place in a future where Earth is under siege from an alien race known as the Mimics. Cruise plays Major William Cage, a military PR officer with no combat experience who is thrown into battle against his will. He dies almost immediately, only to wake up and relive the same day over and over again. With each cycle he learns and adapts, guided by war hero Rita Vrataski, played by Emily Blunt, also known as the Angel of Verdun. Unlike many female action leads, she is not a love interest or a sidekick. She's the hardened warrior and mentor. She trains Cruise's character through brutal repetition. As the two fight through endless resets, they must find a way to break the loop and defeat the enemy before humanity is wiped out. Based on the 2004 Japanese light novel All You Need Is Kill, Edge of Tomorrow went through several script revisions before landing in the hands of director Doug Liman, best known for The Bourne Identity, Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Jumper. And while his previous films were grounded in espionage or stylised action comedy, Edge of Tomorrow marks a shift into full-fledged sci-fi spectacle. He described it as a sci-fi war movie with a sense of playfulness, balancing high-stakes action with dark humour and self-awareness. Screenplay was penned by Christopher McQuarrie, Jez Butterworth and John Henry Butterworth, with McQuarrie's influence particularly evident in the tight character-driven dialogue and structure. McQuarrie, known for The Usual Suspects and later his work on Mission Impossible films, helped refine the film's darkly comedic edge, ensuring that its time loop concept remained engaging rather than repetitive. Despite strong critical praise, Edge of Tomorrow had a lukewarm box office performance, but over time it has gained a reputation as one of the best sci-fi action films of the last decade. And, of course, the 3D presentation played a significant role in immersing audiences in the chaotic, war-torn battlefield, enhancing the experience without feeling like a gimmick. Okay, so The Edge of Tomorrow. Groundhog Day meets Starship Troopers and Saving Private Ryan. If you just mix those films up together. So this and Dredd actually are two films that I own that I haven't watched yet. I suppose they could fall into that category as well. I've had this for a while. I had it on Blu-ray and then I've recently picked it up on 3D Blu-ray. So I've got plenty of 3D, plenty of films, Blu-rays and that to get rid of. And I will start doing that at some point. I'll start coming up with some ideas to give them, as giveaways. I've got hundreds of films to give away. So we'll do that soon. Anyway, yeah, Tom Cruise. It's a Tom Cruise film. As I said before, I'm not a big fan of Tom Cruise. I think he has like 5 faces that he puts on for each movie. I always think whenever he's in a film, he's bigger than life, better than life, The absolute Hollywood hero, over the top, far-fetched. And yeah, as it mentioned in the little intro I wrote there, Cruise plays Major William Cage, a PR officer with no combat experience who's thrown into battle against his will. For the first 10 minutes of this film, this was one of the most interesting Tom Cruise characters I've ever seen. He's a real coward. He's spineless. He's, a weasel. He's trying to get out of the battle in every way he can. And I would have liked to have seen more of that. But 20 minutes into the film, he's already repeated the day so many times as becoming a bit of a legend. He's all of a sudden he's cool and awesome. And more like the Tom Cruise that I just absolutely get tired of. It's the Tom Cruise aspect of this film that has put me off watching it. And I know that's an awful thing to say, but that's how I feel. I get aggravated watching Tom Cruise. I can't believe him. I don't like looking at him much. There's scenes in this where he just really... Oh, God, he grates on me. But I've always wanted to watch this film at the same time. I love the concept. I love time loops and things like that. And... So I've always wanted to see this film, and now I've watched it, I must say I really, really enjoyed it. There isn't one of these films that I've watched in this marathon so far that I haven't enjoyed. I've enjoyed them all for different reasons, but they've all been really enjoyable, and the 3D's been, pretty good throughout. And what I did find interesting about this film was that, unlike most other time loop films, this one here, every time you think you're seeing something for the first time with Tom Cruise's character, it's not always that way. He'll say something then that makes you think, he's already done this. So they always take you up to the point where he's advancing that timeline, if you know what I mean. And we've missed out on all that training, which I think is a good thing because you can just retread the same thing too much in this type of film. So I think the script really works well with how they'll just keep moving the story forward like a normal film, but then letting us into the secret that it's already been there before. It's the kind of illogically impossible film that if you look too closely, it would absolutely ruin your enjoyment of the movie. Like when he's redoing things from day to day, like a computer game, it's great fun. If you die in a computer game, you start again. But the slightest variations in your movements or interactions beforehand, this is what I always think with these sorts of films, would mean that it's very unlikely that you'll be in exactly the same place at the same time to meet the same people doing the same things. This is a point that I had with Groundhog Day as well, because if he gets out of his bed in the morning and slowly makes his way, he still meets Ned Ryerson outside, or if he gets out and then runs straight out, he meets Ned Ryerson, and you think, well, he must have, that's 2 different time scales, but he still meets all the same people in the same place. Very similar here. I love that, there's untold days. You don't know how quickly he's advancing or how many times he's been through this. That concept's just mind-boggling, But I just wish they'd played with him being useless more in the opening scenes than they did, because it doesn't take, like I say, it's 20 minutes and he's Super Cruise like he always is, and I think that's a shame. In fact, I think this film would have been 100 times better with any other actor than Tom Cruise. I'm not just saying that just because I don't like him. I just honestly believe that. An actor who possibly could have been lost into the role, and it would have been a more interesting thing, because there's some shots in this where, you know, Tom Cruise is jumping and running around shooting all these aliens, and it is, you know, there's moments of comedy there, but when all his platoon are all in this trench and there's that shot of him running around blasting all these aliens and he's running around like a school kid, it's funny, but there's something annoying about it. There's something Tom Cruisey about it at the same time, which I don't know, it just... But, you know, like I said, I love that we don't need to see him doing every single attempt to get to the points where he is. So there's quite a good cast in this as well, not just Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. Bill Paxton turns up as Major Sergeant Farrell. Quite a funny character, you know, he's here to sort of follow instructions. This guy's going to want to get out of this, because Tom Cruise, like we say, he's a PR officer, really. He's not a combat person. And then Brendan Gleeson as General Brigham, sort of, he's not the villain of the piece, but he's an antagonist to Cruise. He puts him into the battle. He's like, yeah, you're in my command, I'm going to put you into battle, to piss him off, sort of thing. And he's told Bill Paxton's character to, you know, watch this one when he comes in. Make sure, you know, he's a slippery one. He's going to want to try and get out of this. And so I quite enjoyed how Paxton's like on top of him, but then each time Tom Cruise comes back, he's less like the version of himself that Brendan Gleeson has warned him about. Do you know? And yeah, I just quite enjoyed that. You know, I likened it a second ago to a computer game. Actually, the last two films, Dredd, felt very much like a computer game as well. But this one especially, you know, you've got that every time you die, you respawn, you start again. And like a computer game, Cruise's character is learning, trial and error, how to sort of navigate this. Well, it's not just the battlefield, you know, he's got to split up from his squadron and go and find Emily Blunt's character and then explain to her. It must be frustrating having to explain to her, go through that process every morning as if he's never met her, and explain how much. I mean, this is the thing, she goes off and she's got the little chap, I can't think of his name now, the actor, he's in The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, he's Charlie Bucket's dad in Tim Burton's Willy Wonka, and he's like her scientist friend, and they've got, you know, they go in and discuss the plans. But how many times would he have to tell them exactly what he's known? It must be really frustrating. But yeah, at the beginning, you know, he's useless, he's panicked, he's untrained, he's overwhelmed by the chaos of this battle. He realises it's a trap, and let's not deny this is supposed to be Normandy, the beaches of Normandy. It's very much that sort of Saving Private Ryan feel. They're outnumbered, they're losing, it was a trap, the creatures knew they were coming. But he makes basic mistakes, dies within minutes, and as the film progresses, he's adapting and learning not only how to fight, but also how to anticipate the enemy's movements, you know, and it gives him this precision to sort of manipulate his surroundings and the battle to his advantage, very much like you would in a computer game. You know, right, if I go over this hill, then two aliens are going to jump from there, or something's going to pop out of here. So he's just learning, he's going over and over and over and learning. But it must be frustrating to learn like that, because on a computer game, it's a mere seconds before you're back at the battle, whereas in this version, it's he's got to wait full day to get back to that point. And we do, as an audience, we like that progression, to see that progression in his abilities. And we like to, you know, see that, recognise that evolution from cowardly officer to hardened warrior. It makes it feel earned. Although I'm saying, you know, I just think it may have been better with any actor other than Tom Cruise, where you might have believed that they was the character rather than this A-list action film star that is always in these sort of roles. I don't know, it might have been better to drag it out a little, I don't know. Because as the film stands, it's a nice pace. And it definitely doesn't need to slow down any. But as the film sort of continues, Cruise and Blunt's characters, they come to realise that to get a victory in the war against the Mimics, it's not just about surviving or winning the beach battle. The more they loop through the battle, the clearer it becomes that the invasion is a trap. The aliens are always one step ahead, and it means that winning that battle on the beach is meaningless if the enemy has already accounted for it. So, Cruise and Blunt, they come to understand that the real key to ending the war lies in sort of locating and destroying what they call the Omega, which is this alien hive mind that controls the entire mimic force. Very similar to Ender's Game, isn't it? And Starship Troopers, as I said again. They begin to piece together these clues about its location. Cruise has the visions that, Emily Blunt has warned him about, because she used to have exactly this. And they realise that the Omega is hiding beneath the Louvre in Paris. And they have to go rogue because he's a private, and they can't persuade anyone in a day that that's what's got to happen. No one believes their story, no matter how many times they have to tell them. So they have to go rogue to make their mission, to go off on their mission. And, and it's at this point that the dynamic between the characters really changed, because all the way through, Emily Blunt's Rita has been sort of the stronger, more experienced fighter. But at this point, she's not gone any further. She's starting to have to rely on Cruise's knowledge of the future events. He's seen more than she is. So, this is where he becomes full circle. He started the film as this untrained coward, but now has become someone who's capable of leading a mission himself. But then again, the stakes rise then when he loses the ability to reset after a medical procedure. They've took the blood out of him, which means that, every decision they make from that point is final. And that's, the real end of the movie. It makes the end a lot better knowing that he can't just respawn. So it's a great way to end a great fun film. It is such a great fun film. So Emily Blunt's character, Rita, the Angel of Verdun, also known as the Full Metal Bitch. Basically, you see in the intro to the film, it's sort of a news broadcast that gives the story and the characters. So you meet Brendan Gleeson as the general, sort of discussing the war. Obviously, see the war, these aliens sort of coming down and taking over Europe. So much the same as sort of Hitler, really. The director on the special features as well actually points out that, he loved World War II. Not loved it, it's not. I know what he means. Fascinated by it, and so this war is based on World War II, but that story's told, and then also they tell the story of the Angel of Verdun, and she's this legendary figure due to her heroic efforts during a battle. She clocked up hundreds of kills, all in one day in one battle, and has become this sort of icon. And Tom Cruise is on the news broadcast as well, the sort of the PR guy, and he's promoting her and using that to try and entice new recruits into the army, all that sort of thing, against the mimics. So you get this idea that she's going through the time loop, the loops and stuff. But I was under the impression that it was the suits that done this. But as we find out later on, as Cruise battles this certain blue mimic and it leaks its blood on him, that's what creates it. So before the events of that movie and that battle, the disastrous Battle of Verdun, she was just an ordinary soldier, but at some point during that battle she was killed due to this sort of freak event with this alpha mimic, and it gives her this ability to reset every time she dies, just as Tom Cruise does later. And she's learned and she's trained and she's become this unstoppable warrior, but by the time she meets Tom Cruise, she's lost that ability. So she's sort of pleased to see that he has it and she can help train him. So the training scenes I just think were great, not just because I enjoy seeing Tom Cruise getting smashed from pillar to post, but I also enjoy seeing Emily Blunt shoot Tom Cruise dead in the head over and over again. Oh, I'm only joking. I joke, of course. But it doesn't matter whereabouts he is on that course when he fails or injures himself, and she's like, right, well, this is a waste of time now, we just kill you and start again. And it's the same shot of her shooting him in the head every time. Doesn't matter where the event took place on their training, in their training arena. So the aliens as well, let's talk about the aliens. The mimics, they move really quickly. What do they remind me of? A bit of how the black stuff that creates venom in Spider-Man 3 moves. It's all very like that. But then these creatures, they just sort of flick around. And wasn't overly impressed with the creatures. They're not I don't know. They seemed very CGI of the time, with your Transformers and things. Everything sort of moves the same. Well, still, it's still great. And as I said, it's just great fun. So the 3D in The Edge of Tomorrow, I think it was, I did look it up, it was converted after, so it wasn't filmed in 3D. It certainly works and certainly enhances that sense of space and movement and the sort of the chaos on the battlefield, on the battle scenes. There's no sort of pop-out effects, it's all the depth again. One of the standout sequences is, obviously on the beach. It plays out like a sci-fi D-Day with this sort of intense action. A combination of like handheld cinematography and these wide sweeping shots of the scale, of the battle, give it scale. And the 3D sort of helps to sort of throw you into that action with crashing dropships and soldiers scattered and these shifting sort of unpredictable movements of the mimics. It's all, and it all fills the screen like with the debris and these explosions. It all fills the frame and gives this real chaotic action feel to the film. It's immersive, but it's not too much. It's not too gimmicky. It just works really well. Another area where I think that the 3D worked really well, is the use of depth of field during the combat. In many of the heavy action films, battles can become visually sort of disorientating, a lot of the fight sequences, and especially in 3D. I mean, even Avatar, when I watched that at the cinema, there's a few scenes where you're like, it's too much going on, I can't focus, too much movement. Whereas Edge of Tomorrow, it sort of avoids that. There's a clear separation between the background and the foreground and the action scenes, even though it's fast-paced. You never sort of like, oh, God, it's confusing. And the dropship sequences as well are great in the 3D, especially like, he's in the dropship and their ship gets hit and they're all sort of dropping earlier than they should have. But that's what I mean. It doesn't matter at what point Tom Cruise leaves, because at the beginning he leaves really late, and in the later episodes he's like gone before everyone else has. But he always ends up at the same place to rescue the same people at the same times, and it doesn't make... That's what I mean. It doesn't make sense. You can't think about things like that too much. But those scenes inside the transport ships, especially when it's like breaking apart mid-air and it's crashing onto the battlefield, really does benefit from like the 3D. It's that sense of being within that space as it's breaking up and the free falling and the tumbling debris. It makes you feel like you are right inside the chaos. It's solid, but it's not revolutionary 3D. It enhances the immersion experience, but it doesn't redefine the experience like Gravity or Dredd did, But that said, it's still a good way to watch the film. Especially if you're fans of these like large-scale science fiction action, it really works well. So, comparing it to the other 3D films in the science fiction marathon, Edge of Tomorrow takes a more grounded approach than Gravity, but it still delivers this spectacle-driven experience. Gravity uses 3D to sort of not just emphasise the vastness of space, but it also helps you feel as the audience, as the viewer, the isolation and the feeling of being in space, the movement, the zero gravity, the floating. It's almost like a simulation, and you feel all these things alongside Sandra Bullock's character. The Martian takes a more subtle approach. It uses 3D to add to the depth of the alien landscapes and that. And it's a very much more subtle film that, certain scenes are better for the 3D, but it doesn't necessarily need it. It doesn't change that experience so much. Whereas Dredd, and Gravity, they both use 3D in a highly stylised way. I mean, Dredd, especially those slow motion sequences, just turns those moments of violence into sort of almost sort of artistic compositions. It's great. There's quite a few similarities between these films as I watch them over. It's quite strange that all four films tell stories of characters who are trapped within this bad situation and they need problem solving, determination and sort of resilience to get out of those situations. Whether that's just evident in all films, I don't know, but I noticed it in here because, Matt Damon's trapped on Mars, he's got to get out. Sandra Bullock is trapped in space. Dredd is trapped in the tower block. Tom Cruise is trapped on that beach. Well, he's trapped in the same day as well. So, anyway, that, I think, about wraps it up. I've talked enough about these 4 films. I've hoped you've enjoyed this. I don't know if any of you guys out there have got 3D TVs and things, but these were definitely worth checking in. I might one day look to get a 3D projector, and then I can have a bigger screen and see if I can replicate those experiences that, you know, that I'm missing out on having watched all these films on a TV rather than a screen. And yeah, if I'd have known Dredd was going to be that great, I'd have loved to have seen that at the cinema back in the day as well. And Gravity, and even Edge of Tomorrow. I wish I'd watched that sooner. This is a great film, that. And, you know, I could have done an episode all about time loops and had that, Groundhog Day, Palm Springs. Any others you can think of? Let me know in the comments. So there we go anyway. Another episode of WN Movie Talk podcast. Thank you ever so much for listening. I am Trev. If you want to get in touch, we are over on Instagram. We're on Facebook. You can email us at wnmovietalk@gmail.com. I'm going to start doing listener requests again now, so if you have any ideas for films you want me to discuss and review, then please do get in touch. Write me a nice little email so it'll make a nice little introduction. But yeah, plenty of episodes there in the back catalogue for you to listen to, and I will try and keep kicking these out a bit more regularly now. I've actually continuing my James Bond series. I've actually started writing the next episode for that. So I'm putting that together, so that should be out anytime soon. Plus I've got to finish my top 50 movies from 12 years ago. If you've started listening to that series, that final episode will be out soon as well. Anyway, I'll see you all again soon. Cheers!